The ridge had been silent for 11 minutes. That was the part that made Colonel Vargas grip the radio handset until his knuckles whitened. 11 minutes without gunfire, without screams, without the static-laced voices of men who'd been holding that god-forsaken stretch of rock for 3 days straight. The operations center smelled like burned coffee and fear, and every officer crowded around the holographic display knew what silence meant in the Kashgar Valley. It meant the position had fallen. It meant 200 Marines were either dead or running, and the insurgent advance would punch through to the supply corridor by nightfall. Vargas had already ordered the artillery to prepare fire missions on friendly coordinates. The math was brutal and simple. But then, cutting through the white noise and the barely contained panic, came a voice nobody expected. Riot control to Overwatch. I'm 3 minutes out from grid November 7-4. Somebody want to tell me why I'm seeing orange smoke instead of purple? The voice was calm, almost bored, with the faintest trace of a Texan drawl that seemed completely incongruous with the disaster unfolding on every screen. Vargas exchanged glances with his S3. Orange smoke meant troops in contact, danger close. Purple meant the position was lost, pull back, sanitize with artillery. Someone on that ridge was still alive, still fighting, still marking targets. Riot control, Overwatch, who the hell authorized your mission? Vargas demanded. Nobody, sir. I was RTB from a recon run, heard the chatter, figured I'd take a look. Now I'm looking and what I'm seeing is about 400 dismounts trying to overrun your people. They're not there yet. 400. The estimate had been half that. Vargas felt his stomach drop. Riot control, you're carrying training ordnance. You are not, I repeat, not configured for close air support. There was a pause. Through it, Vargas could hear something. The distinctive howl of twin turbofans, the sound every grunt loved and every enemy feared. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, ugliest angel in the sky. Well, sir, that's technically true. I've got one training gun pod, 40% ammunition, and a real bad attitude about people shooting at Marines. I'm also the only aircraft within 20 minutes of this position. So unless you've got a better idea, I'm going in. Vargas looked at the display. At the red icon swarming toward the blue, at the timer counting down to when he'd have to give the order to obliterate his own men, he pressed the transmit button. Riot control, you are cleared hot. God help you. Copy, cleared hot. God won't need to help me, sir. I've done this before. The Warthog dropped through 6,000 feet like a falcon stooping on prey, and Captain Rene Riot Cahill pushed the throttles forward, feeling the aircraft shudder with barely restrained violence. The A-10 wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast. It was 7 tons of titanium bathtub wrapped around a 30mm cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds the size of milk bottles, and it flew like a dump truck with anger management issues. Rene loved it more than anything in the world. Through the canopy, the Kashgar Valley spread below her in shades of brown and gray, all jagged peaks and narrow defiles where men had been killing each other since before Alexander the Great marched through. The ridge was easy to spot, smoke rising from a dozen points, the dark scatter of bodies, the glint of metal that meant technical vehicles and heavy weapons. She armed the gun and selected the training pod, knowing it was loaded with reduced charge rounds meant for range practice, not combat. It would have to be enough. Riot control, Demon 2-1, we're getting hammered up here. The voice was young, cracking with stress. Lieutenant somebody, probably on his first deployment, trying to sound calm and failing. 2-1 Riot, I see you. Count 4 technicals, grid November 7-4 Alpha, advancing your position. You need to get your people behind hard cover right now. We're already behind cover. They're throwing everything. The transmission cut off as an explosion bloomed orange on the hillside. Renee's jaw tightened. She rolled inverted, pulled the stick back, and dove. The Warthog accelerated reluctantly, airspeed building as the ridge rushed up to meet her. At 2,000 feet, she rolled wings level, selected the gun, and laid the pipper on the lead technical, a Toyota pickup with a Russian heavy machine gun bolted to the bed. She pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger spoke with a sound like the universe tearing in half, a roar so deep and violent it shook the airframe. 30mm rounds streaked downward at nearly 4,000 feet per second, and the technical disintegrated. 1 second it was there. The next it was shrapnel and fire. Rene pulled up hard, grunting against the G-forces, and broke right. Tracers arced up toward her, bright lines of death reaching through the thin air. The A-10's titanium tub was built to take punishment, but she wasn't interested in testing its limits today. She rolled, dove again, and selected the second technical. Another trigger press, another apocalyptic roar, another target converted to wreckage. "Holy shit," someone breathed over the radio. "Riot, Demon 2-1, you just saved our asses." Rene didn't respond immediately. She was too busy staying alive. The insurgents had finally figured out where the fire was coming from, and every gun on that hillside was now pointed skyward. She jinked hard left, then right, keeping her speed up, making herself an impossible target. The Warthog responded like a loyal dog, ugly but obedient. She came around for another pass, lower this time, and spotted muzzle flashes from a tree line. Infantry, lots of them, advancing under cover. She walked the cannon fire across the trees, watching branches explode and bodies tumble. It felt clinical, distant, like playing a video game, until she remembered these were the same people who'd executed 3 Marines last month and posted the video online. Then it felt like justice. "Riot control, Overwatch, what's your ammunition state?" Vargas's voice, tight with tension. 60%, Rene lied. It was closer to 40, but she wasn't leaving until this was done. She pulled up, cleared the ridgeline, and scanned for targets. The technicals were dead, but the infantry kept coming. They were disciplined, she'd give them that. Most irregular forces would have broken after losing their vehicles. These fighters knew what they were doing. She spotted a mortar position and dove. The training rounds weren't ideal for point targets, but she could work with it. She fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition, each one a hammer blow from the sky. The mortar position vanished in a cloud of dust and debris. "Riot 2-1, they're pulling back. They're actually pulling back." The lieutenant's voice was incredulous, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Rene allowed herself a small smile. Of course they were pulling back. Nobody wanted to fight a warthog in a canyon. It was suicide, but her smile faded as she checked her fuel gauge. She'd been burning through gas like it was water, all those hard maneuvers eating into her reserves. She had maybe 10 minutes of loiter time before she'd have to break off or risk flaming out over hostile territory. 10 minutes to make sure the Marines stayed alive. 2-1, Riot, I'm going to make a few more passes, then I need to RTB for gas and ammunition. Can you hold? There was a pause. We'll hold. And Riot, I don't know who you are, but thank you. Who she was? That was a complicated question. Rene Cahill was 33 years old, a third-generation military pilot, and the daughter of a Navy Cross recipient who died over Fallujah when she was 12. She'd grown up on Marine Corps bases from Okinawa to North Carolina, learned to fly in a Cessna 172 before she could legally drive, and graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy. She'd wanted to fly fighters, FA-18s off carriers, but her eyesight was .05 below the cutoff, so she'd gone Air Force, transitioned to attack aircraft, and ended up in the A-10 community. Some people saw it as settling. Rene saw it as coming home. The Warthog suited her temperament, pragmatic, tough, designed for a mission everyone else thought was obsolete. Close air support, danger close, flying low and slow where the enemy could shoot back. It wasn't glamorous. There were no news stories about A-10 pilots, no call sign patches sold in Pentagon gift shops. Just the quiet knowledge that when ground troops were dying, when the situation was desperate, the Warthog would come. Always. She made 2 more passes, burning through the last of her training ammunition, suppressing enemy movement, buying time for the Marines to consolidate their position and medevac their wounded. By the time she pulled off target, her fuel gauge was kissing the red line and her hands ached from gripping the stick. Overwatch, Riot Control. I'm Winchester on ammunition, bingo fuel, departing station heading 270. Copy, Riot. Good work up there. What's your home plate? Rene hesitated. She'd been flying out of a classified forward operating base, doing reconnaissance work that officially didn't exist. But the cat was out of the bag now. Home plate is Whiskey 7, sir. I'll need priority recovery and immediate rearm. I'm coming back. There was surprise in Vargas's voice. Say again you're coming back. Yes, sir. Those Marines need air cover until you can get a proper package on station. I'll be wheels up again in 90 minutes. She could hear the smile in his response. Understood, Riot Control. We'll have you ready. And Captain, that was some of the best flying I've seen in 30 years. Colonel Vargas sends. Riene keyed the mic once in acknowledgement, then switched to tower frequency and began her recovery checklist. The landing was smooth despite her exhaustion, the Warthog kissing the runway with barely a chirp from the tires. Riene taxied to the hardstand where a ground crew was already waiting, and as she shut down the engines, the sudden silence felt overwhelming. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that and made them stop. A crew chief appeared at her ladder, a young sergeant with grease-stained hands and an expression of pure awe. "Ma'am, they said you just held a ridge with training ammo. That true?" Riene unfastened her harness and pulled off her helmet, letting her long black hair fall free. It was against regs to wear it that long, but her squadron commander had stopped caring about such things years ago. "Training ammo is still ammo, Sergeant. It's just less forgiving." "Still," the sergeant persisted, steadying the ladder as she climbed down, "that's some hot shit flying, ma'am. Pardon my French." She managed a tired smile. "French pardon. How fast can you get me rearmed and refueled?" "We've got a full loadout ready to go. Somebody upstairs must like you. They diverted it from another bird. You'll have the whole package this time. 30mm high-explosive incendiary Maverick missiles, the works. 45 minutes, maybe less." Riene nodded and headed toward the operations building, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air. Other pilots watched her pass, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed skepticism. She was used to it. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and overwhelmingly male. Women flew Warthogs, sure, but not many, and the old attitudes died hard. She'd spent her entire career proving herself, over and over, mission after mission. It got tiring. Inside the operations center, Colonel Vargas was waiting. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent too many years in desert climates. He stood when she entered, which surprised her. Officers didn't usually stand for captains. "Captain Cahill, hell of a first impression. Sir, I was just doing my job." "Your job was flying recon. You decided to freelance into a hot LZ with inadequate ordnance and no support. That's either insane or brilliant." He paused. "Report says it worked, so I'm going with brilliant, but don't make a habit of it." Riene stood at attention, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It always did. Vargas studied her for a moment, then gestured to a chair. "Sit. You look like you're about to fall over." She sat gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Flying combat wasn't like the simulators. The stress, the adrenaline, the hyperfocus required to stay alive. It drained you in ways that were hard to explain. Vargas pulled up a holographic display showing the ridge. The blue icons representing Marines were stable now, reinforced by a quick reaction force that had fought its way up the access road. The red icons had scattered into the mountains. "Because of you, 200 Marines are still alive. Their battalion commander wants to put you in for a medal. I told him to get in line." He paused. "But I need to know if you can do it again, right now, because the situation is still developing and those fighters will regroup. They always do." Riene met his eyes. "Yes, sir, I can do it again. You'll be carrying live ordnance this time, full combat load. The rules of engagement are weapons-free on any hostile forces within 10 clicks of that ridge. Are you comfortable with that?" "Yes, sir." It wasn't quite true. She was never comfortable with killing, but she was willing, and in this line of work that was enough. Vargas nodded slowly. "Your file says you did 3 tours over Afghanistan, 2 over Iraq, 74 combat missions. 311 confirmed enemy kills, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with Valor device, and before that you flew rescue helicopters out of Bagram." He looked up from the display. "You're also the only pilot in theater who's ever successfully extracted a downed crew from a hot LZ using an A-10. That was a different situation, sir. I read the report. You landed a Warthog on a highway under fire, picked up 2 Navy pilots and flew them out. The aircraft review board said the landing gear should have collapsed. You said it was within tolerances." Riene allowed herself a small smile. The The tolerances are generous if you know how to use them, sir. I'm starting to see that. Vargas closed the display and leaned back. Tell me about your call sign. Riot control. The question hung in the air and Renee felt her chest tighten. She'd known it would come eventually. It always did. It's not a very interesting story, sir. Captain, I just watched you fly into a shitstorm with training ammo because you heard Marines calling for help. Respectfully, I think I get to hear the story. She took a breath. Call signs were supposed to be funny, embarrassing, the result of some mistake or personality quirk that your squadron mates latched onto. Hers wasn't like that. I got it during my second deployment to Afghanistan. We were supporting a Marine company in Helmand Province and they walked into an ambush. Complex attack, well coordinated. They were taking fire from 3 sides, trapped in a kill zone, and the infantry were starting to panic. You could hear it on the radio, voices getting higher, people talking over each other, the kind of chaos that gets people killed. She paused, remembering. The sun had been setting, painting the Hindu Kush in shades of orange and red, and the radio had been a cacophony of fear. I was the on-station CAS bird and my wingman was 10 minutes out. The forward air controller was dead, his radio still transmitting, so all I had was the company commander screaming grid coordinates and begging for help. I told him to shut up. Just like that, shut up, give me 30 seconds and mark your friendlies. I think it shocked him into compliance. He did what I asked and I went to work. 8 passes, danger close, some of them inside 50 meters of friendly positions. When it was over, the Marines were alive and the ambushers were dead. The company commander wanted to know who I was, and when he found out, he said I'd controlled that riot of a situation like a pro. The name stuck. Vargas was quiet for a moment. And now it reminds me why I do this, sir. Because when everything goes wrong, when people are dying and nobody knows what to do, somebody needs to stay calm. Somebody needs to control the riot. The colonel nodded slowly. Get some food, Captain. Drink water. Be ready to fly in 30 minutes. Renee stood, saluted, and headed for the door. The ready room was empty except for one other pilot, a major named Terk who flew one of the other A-10s in the squadron. He looked up from his mission planning tablet as Renee entered, and his expression was unreadable. Heard you had an interesting morning. You could say that. She grabbed a protein bar from the snack table and a bottle of water, forcing herself to eat even though she wasn't hungry. Fuel for the body, same as fuel for the aircraft. Terk watched her for a moment. You know people are talking, right? Saying you went cowboy, violated procedure, got lucky. Renee shrugged. People always talk. I'm just saying, be careful. There are folks who think women in combat aviation is still some kind of experiment and they're looking for reasons to prove it doesn't work. Don't give them ammunition. She looked at him directly. Major, with respect, I've been dealing with that my entire career. I stopped caring what people think about women in cockpits around the same time I got my wings. I care about the mission, that's it. Terk held up his hands. Fair enough. And for what it's worth, what you did today was solid. I wouldn't have had the stones to go in with training rounds. It was as close to a compliment as she was going to get from him, and she appreciated it. Male pilots in the A-10 community were usually decent once they saw you could fly, but there was always a testing period, an invisible bar you had to clear before they accepted you as an equal. She'd cleared that bar 100 times and she'd clear it 100 more if that's what it took. A crew chief appeared in the doorway. Captain Cahill, your bird's ready. Full load, post-flight complete, she's good to go. Renee drained the water bottle, tossed it in the recycling bin, and grabbed her helmet. Thanks, Sergeant. I'll try not to break her this time. The crew chief grinned. Break her all you want, ma'am, that's what she's for. Outside, the sun was climbing toward its zenith, and the heat was starting to build. Her Warthog sat on the hardstand, surrounded by ordnance crew making final checks. She did a walk around, checking control surfaces, looking for leaks or damage, running her hands along the fuselage like a rider checking a horse before a long journey. The aircraft looked meaner now, bristling with weapons. Under each wing hung an AGM-65 Maverick missile, precision-guided and capable of destroying armored vehicles with a single hit. The centerline station carried a full load of 30mm ammunition, 1,100 rounds of high-explosive incendiary, enough to turn vehicles into scrap and buildings into rubble. It was a far cry from the training ordnance she'd carried that morning, and the weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. This was real now. No more half measures. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and ran through her pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Switches, gauges, circuit breakers, radios. Everything had to be perfect because in combat, the smallest mistake could kill you. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and she felt the Warthog come alive beneath her. It was an old design, Vietnam-era thinking wrapped in modern avionics, and it flew like it looked, heavy, ungainly, but absolutely unstoppable once it got moving. She loved it for that, for the honesty of it. Fighter jocks in their F-35s and F-22s got all the glory, all the headlines, but when the shit hit the fan, when American lives were on the line, it was the Warthog that showed up. Every time. Tower riot control ready for taxi. Riot control tower taxi to runway 27, winds 260 at 8, cleared for immediate departure. She released the brakes and rolled forward, the Warthog's nose gear tracking straight down the taxiway. Through the canopy she could see other aircraft, helicopters, transports, a pair of F-16s preparing for a different mission. All part of the same machine, the vast logistical apparatus that kept warfighters alive. At the runway threshold she ran through her final checks, then pushed the throttles to full power. The Warthog accelerated sluggishly at first, weighed down by fuel and weapons, then gathered speed. At 140 knots she rotated and the aircraft lifted off, climbing into the clear mountain sky. Riot control airborne, switching departure. Copy Riot, good hunting. She turned toward the Kashgar Valley, checking her navigation display and reviewing the target brief. The Marines on the ridge had reported enemy movement in the surrounding hills, small groups, likely scouts or forward observers, setting up for another attack. Her job was to find them and eliminate the threat before it materialized. At 15,000 feet, the world spread out below her in intricate detail. The valley was a maze of ridges and draws, perfect ambush country, and she understood immediately why the Marines were having such a hard time. You could hide an army down there if you knew the terrain. She switched to the tactical frequency. Overwatch, riot control on station, full loadout ready for tasking. Copy Riot. We're tracking multiple small groups in your area of operations. Demon 2-1 will be your ground controller. Stand by for handoff. A moment later, a different voice came through her headset. Riot Demon 2-1, man, are we glad to hear your voice again. It was the same lieutenant from earlier, sounding steadier now, more confident. Renee felt a small surge of satisfaction. Marines were resilient. Give them a little breathing room and they bounced back fast. 2-1 Riot, where do you need me? We've got eyes on a group of approximately 20 dismounts, grid November 76 Charlie, moving northeast toward our position. They're staying in the low ground using cover, but we've been tracking them with thermals. Renee checked her display and found the grid. It was 3 kilometers from the ridge, in a narrow canyon that twisted through the hills like a snake. Perfect terrain for an ambush, terrible terrain for air support. The canyon walls would limit her attack angle and she'd have to come in low to be effective, which meant exposure, risk. She pushed the thought aside. 2-1 Riot, I have the grid. Are there any friendly forces in the area? Negative, the area is clear. You are cleared hot. Danger close does not apply. Copy cleared hot. I'm coming in from the west, low-level run. Keep your heads down in case I miss. Roger that, and Riot, they're carrying heavy weapons. Be careful. Renee smiled grimly. Careful is my middle name. She rolled the Warthog inverted and pulled the nose down, beginning a descent that would take her below the ridgelines. The altimeter unwound rapidly, 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000. At 3,000 feet above ground level, she rolled wings level and began her run, the canyon walls rising on either side like the teeth of a trap. The visibility was perfect, the kind of clear mountain air that let you see for miles, and Renee spotted the group almost immediately. 20 fighters, just like the lieutenant had said, moving in tactical formation with discipline that spoke of training and experience. They weren't random insurgents. These were professional soldiers, probably former military from one of the regional powers, hired out to the highest bidder. That made them dangerous. She armed a Maverick missile, locked the infrared seeker onto the center of the group, and waited for the tone that would tell her she had a good lock. It came immediately, a steady warble in her headset. She squeezed the trigger and felt the missile leap off the rail with a burst of white smoke. It streaked downward, riding an invisible beam of infrared energy, and impacted dead center in the formation. The explosion was brilliant, a flower of orange flame that sent bodies tumbling like rag dolls. Renee didn't watch the effects. She was already turning, pulling up and away from the canyon walls, checking her six for threats. Anti-aircraft fire started immediately, tracers reaching up from hidden positions, and she realized too late that she'd walked into a trap. The fighters in the canyon had been bait. The real threat was the guns hidden in the rocks above them, carefully positioned to catch aircraft making attack runs. She pulled hard, grunting against the G-forces, and jinked left as a stream of tracers passed through the space where she'd been a heartbeat before. The Warthog's warning system screamed at her, radar lock, missile launch, and she punched out chaff and flares while simultaneously diving for the deck. A surface-to-air missile streaked past her canopy, close enough that she saw the motor burn, and then she was clear, racing down the canyon at 200 feet, using the terrain to break the enemy's radar lock. 2-1 Riot, I'm taking effective anti-aircraft fire, multiple gun positions in the rocks above the canyon. Copy Riot, we see it, can you suppress? Can you suppress? Such a simple question asked in the calm tones of someone who wasn't currently being shot at. Renee checked her weapons display. She still had one Maverick 1100 rounds of 30mm and a very bad attitude. 2-1, affirm. I'm coming around for another pass. Mark the gun positions with laser. The lieutenant didn't question her decision, which showed either trust or desperation. Probably both. Marking now. Stand by. Renee pulled up and over a ridgeline, gaining altitude and separation, then came around hard in a combat turn that pushed the Warthog to its structural limits. Through the canopy, she saw green laser light painting a spot on the canyon wall, one of the Marines' ground designators, marking a target for precision weapons. She locked her second Maverick onto the laser energy and fired. The missile guided true, impacting directly on the gun position and silencing it forever. But there were more. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 other positions, all carefully concealed among the rocks. They'd planned this well, set up interlocking fields of fire, turned the canyon into a killing ground. It was a smart ambush, well executed, and it would have worked on most aircraft. But the Warthog was built for this. Built to fly low, take damage, and keep fighting. She rolled in on the next gun position and fired the cannon. The GAU-8 roared, spitting out 60 rounds in a 2-second burst, and the rocks exploded in a storm of fragmentation and dust. She pulled up, rolled, and came back on a different angle, denying them a predictable attack pattern. Another burst, another gun silenced. The anti-aircraft fire was slackening now as the survivors realized they were fighting something they couldn't kill easily. She made one more pass, walking cannon fire across the remaining positions, and then the canyon was quiet. Dead quiet. 2-1 Riot, I think I got them all, can you confirm? There was a pause while the lieutenant checked with his observers. Riot, we're not seeing any more fire. I think you're clear. How's your aircraft? Renee scanned her instruments. She had a hydraulic warning light, something had been hit, probably flying debris rather than direct fire, but all her flight controls responded normally. The Warthog could fly with half its systems shot away, and right now she wasn't even close to that threshold. Aircraft is good. I've got a warning light, but everything's flying normal. What's your status? We're solid. Thanks to you, we're actually solid. They were setting up for a major push, and you just took out their fire support. The colonel says you bought us time to get reinforcements in. Renee felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, the adrenaline finally fatting, leaving behind the shaky aftermath of combat. Her hands were trembling on the stick again, and she had to consciously steady them. She'd been flying on pure instinct for the last 20 minutes, reacting rather than thinking, letting muscle memory and training take over. Now the thinking part of her brain was coming back online, and with it came the realization of how close she'd come to dying. One of those Sams had missed her by meters. Meters. If her timing had been off by half a second, if she'd pulled up instead of down, she'd be a smoking crater in the canyon right now. The thought made her stomach clench. "Riot, you still with us?" The lieutenant's voice concerned. "Yeah, 2-1, still here. Just running my combat damage check." She made a slow, careful orbit of the canyon, scanning for any remaining threats, but the area was clear. The surviving fighters had scattered into the mountains, and the gun positions were silent. Below, she could see the Marines on the ridge waving at her, tiny figures celebrating a victory they probably hadn't expected to see. She rocked her wings in acknowledgement. "Overwatch, riot control. Area secure, all hostile positions neutralized. I'm going to need to RTB for that hydraulic issue." "Copy, riot. You're cleared to return to base, priority handling. And Captain, outstanding work. The ground commander says his people are calling you the Angel of Kashgar." Riene snorted. "That's a bit dramatic, sir." "Maybe, but from where they're standing it probably feels accurate. Come on home, riot. We'll have maintenance look at that hydraulic system." She turned west toward home and climbed to a more comfortable altitude. The flight back was quiet, giving her time to process what had just happened. 2 combat sorties in one morning, both successful, both dangerous. She'd killed a lot of people today. She didn't know the exact count, didn't want to know, and saved a lot of others. The moral math of war was never clean. You did what needed doing and lived with the consequences. Her father would have understood. He'd flown attack helicopters in the same kind of missions, danger close support for ground troops, and he died doing it when his Cobra took an RPG during a rescue mission. She'd been 12 years old, too young to fully understand what it meant, old enough to know he wasn't coming home. The memory of her father was sharp and painful, even after 20 years. She remembered him in fragments, his calloused hands showing her how to pre-flight an aircraft, his voice patient and calm as he explained aerodynamics, the way he'd looked in his dress uniform at military ceremonies. He'd been her hero, larger than life, and his death had shattered something in her that never quite healed. Her mother had wanted her to choose a different path, something safe, but Riene couldn't. Flying was in her blood, as essential as breathing, and the military was the only family she'd ever really known. So she'd followed him into the cockpit, into combat, into the terrible, beautiful business of keeping people alive by killing the people trying to kill them. Sometimes she wondered if he'd be proud of her. Then she remembered the Distinguished Flying Cross in her quarters, the missions logged in her record, the pilots and ground troops who were alive because of her, and she thought maybe he would be. The base appeared on the horizon and she called tower for landing clearance. The approach was smooth despite the hydraulic issue. The Warthog's redundant systems meant you could lose a lot and still fly, and she touched down gently, letting the aircraft roll out before turning off the runway. Ground crew was waiting when she reached the hardstand, and their expressions were different now. There was respect there, the kind you earned rather than received. She shut down, climbed out, and found Colonel Vargas waiting at the bottom of the ladder. "Captain, how's the bird?" "Took some damage, but nothing critical, sir. Maintenance should have her ready to go by tomorrow." Vargas nodded. "Good, because tomorrow we're expanding the operation. More ridges, more valleys, same enemy, and the ground commander specifically requested you for air support." Riene felt something stir in her chest, pride mixed with apprehension. "I'll be ready, sir." "I know you will. Get some rest, that's an order." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "Your father flew Cobras over Iraq, didn't he, Benjamin Cahill?" "Yes, sir. I knew him, not well, but I knew him. He was a good man and a hell of a pilot." Vargas's expression softened slightly. "He'd be proud of you, Captain. What you did today, that's the kind of flying legends are made of." The words hit harder than Riene expected, and she had to swallow hard before responding. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Vargas nodded and walked away, leaving her standing beside her aircraft with the mountain wind pulling at her flight suit. A legend. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt tired and scared and desperately aware of how fragile life was at 300 feet and 200 knots. But maybe that's what legends were, just people doing impossible things because someone had to. She headed for the pilot's quarters, stripped off her sweat-soaked gear, and stood under a lukewarm shower for 20 minutes, letting the water wash away the physical evidence of combat even if it couldn't touch what was in her head. The images would stay, they always did. The technical exploding under her guns, the fighters tumbling in the canyon, the tracers reaching for her canopy. You learned to file them away, to function despite them, or you didn't last long in this job. Afterward, she lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her phone buzzed with messages from other pilots in the squadron, congratulations and questions, but she ignored them. She wasn't ready for the squadron bar camaraderie, the retelling of stories, the inevitable questions about what it felt like. Instead, she pulled out a battered photo from her wallet, her father in his flight suit, standing beside his Cobra, smiling at the camera with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were meant to do. She touched the photo gently. "I hope I'm making you proud, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying. God, I'm trying." Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the same colors as fire and blood. Tomorrow she'd fly again, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as the war lasted. Because that's what you did. You flew, you fought, you kept people alive, and you tried not to think too hard about the cost. It was the only way to survive. The next morning arrived too early, dawn breaking cold and clear over the Kashgar Valley. Renee was already awake, had been for hours, running through mission briefs and studying maps of the terrain she'd be operating over. The operations center had sent over updated intelligence, enemy movements, suspected positions, areas where Marines were pushing forward. The situation was fluid, complicated, the kind of three-dimensional chess game that required constant adaptation. Colonel Vargas had assembled the mission brief in the main operations room, and when Renee arrived, she found it packed with personnel. Ground commanders, air controllers, intelligence officers, even a two-star general she didn't recognize. All eyes turned to her as she entered, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Vargas gestured her to a seat near the front. "Captain Cahill, glad you could join us. General Morrison, this is the pilot I was telling you about." The general was a lean man with gray temples and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in the field. He studied Renee with sharp, evaluating eyes. "Captain, I've been reading the after-action reports from yesterday. Impressive flying." "Thank you, sir. I'm told the Marines are calling you the Angel of Kashgar. That's high praise from ground pounders." Renee didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. The general smiled slightly. "Relax, Captain. You're not in trouble. In fact, you're the reason we're all here. Your actions yesterday proved something important, that aggressive, well-executed close air support can turn the tide of a ground engagement even when we're outnumbered. So we're going to do more of it." He pulled up a holographic display showing the entire valley complex. Red icons dotted the map like a rash, enemy positions and suspected locations, far more than Renee had realized. Intelligence estimates there are somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 enemy fighters in this valley complex. They're well-armed, well-trained, and they know the terrain. We've got about 800 Marines spread across 6 positions, and we're going to push them forward, take and hold these ridgelines, and cut off the enemy's supply routes. It's going to be ugly, and we're going to need air support the entire time. Specifically, we're going to need A-10s. General Morrison looked directly at Renee. "Captain Cahill, I'm putting you in charge of coordinating all A-10 operations in this valley for the next 72 hours. You'll fly lead aircraft, and you'll direct the other Warthogs to where they're needed most. Think you can handle that?" Renee felt her stomach flip. Flight lead was a significant responsibility under normal circumstances, but this was something else entirely. This was operational command, directing multiple aircraft across a complex battlefield, making split-second decisions that would determine whether people lived or died. "Sir, with respect, I'm only a captain. There are more senior." "I don't care about rank," Morrison interrupted. "I care about results. You've proven you can fly in these conditions, you can make good decisions under pressure, and ground troops trust you. That matters more than the number of bars on your shoulders." So I'll ask again, can you handle it? Riene met his eyes. There was challenge there, but also confidence. He believed she could do this, which meant she had to believe it too. Yes, sir, I can handle it. Good. Colonel Vargas will provide the details. Get yourself and your aircraft ready to fly. The operation kicks off at 0900 and I want you in the air by 0845. The briefing continued for another hour, covering rules of engagement, communication protocols, medevac procedures, all the administrative details that kept combat operations running. Riene absorbed it all, taking notes, asking questions when she needed clarification. The other A-10 pilots in the squadron watched her with mixed expressions, some approving, others skeptical. She ignored them. This wasn't about squadron politics. This was about the mission. When the briefing ended, Major Terk caught up with her in the hallway. Flight lead, huh? That's a big step up. I didn't ask for it, Riene said. I know, but you're getting it anyway. Look, I'll be flying your wing on the first sortie. Just don't do anything crazy, okay? Some of us have families to go home to. It was said lightly, but there was an edge to it. Riene stopped walking and looked at him. Major, I'm not reckless. Everything I did yesterday was calculated risk, not cowboy bullshit. I'm not going to get you killed. Terk held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I believe you. But for what it's worth, there are people in the squadron who think women shouldn't be flying combat missions at all, and they're watching you closely, looking for you to screw up. Then I won't screw up. See that you don't. He walked away, leaving Riene standing in the corridor, feeling the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders like armor. She'd dealt with skepticism her entire career, but this was different. This was command, and command meant people would follow her decisions even if they disagreed, even if they thought she was wrong. The responsibility was enormous. She couldn't afford to fail. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. She reviewed the tactical plan with the ground commanders, coordinated with the other A-10 pilots, checked and double-checked her aircraft. The maintenance crew had fixed the hydraulic issue, and the Warthog was loaded with a full combat package, Mavericks, rockets, and 1,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition. It was ready. She needed to be ready too. At 0830 she climbed into the cockpit for the third time in 24 hours, running through her pre-flight with the automatic precision of ritual. Everything had to be perfect. No mistakes, no shortcuts, no assumptions. She strapped in, started engines, and taxied to the runway where Major Terk was already waiting in his own A-10. They took off in formation, climbing into the morning sky, and Riene felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with every combat launch. This was what she was made for. This was what her father had died for. This was the work. Overwatch, Riot Control, Flight of 2 checking in. Copy Riot, we have you on radar. The ground push begins in 10 minutes. Stand by for tasking. Riene switched to the strike frequency and addressed the other A-10s that would be supporting the operation. All Hog elements, this is Riot Control on strike primary. Stay flexible, keep your heads on a swivel, and remember we're here to support the grunts. They die if we fail, so let's not fail. Check in by flight. One by one, the other flights acknowledged. The operation began exactly on schedule, Marines advancing from 6 positions simultaneously, pushing into the valley complex with the kind of organized violence that took years of training to execute properly. Riene orbited overhead, watching the blue icons move on her tactical display, waiting for the inevitable moment when they'd hit resistance. It came within minutes. Riot, Demon 3-6, were taking effective fire from a building complex, Grid November 8-2 Alpha. We need immediate suppression. Riene checked her display, confirmed the grid, and made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. 3-6 Riot, I'm 30 seconds out. Mark the building with smoke. Marking now. She rolled in, diving toward the grid coordinates, and saw purple smoke rising from the Marine position. Beyond it, perhaps 200 meters away, sat a cluster of mud brick buildings with muzzle flashes sparking from the windows. She armed her rockets, selected a pair, and fired. The rockets leaped off the rails with twin trails of white smoke and impacted the buildings in a storm of fire and debris. The shooting stopped. 3-6 Riot, how copy? Good effects, they're pulling back. Riene pulled up and checked her tactical display. 2 more Marine units were reporting contact, both in different sectors. She made another instant decision. Hog 2-1, this is Riot. You've got troops in contact at grid November 84 Charlie. Take your flight and provide support. 2-1 copies, moving now. She directed her attention to the third contact, rolling in on another target, firing another rocket pair, staying constantly in motion. The sky was full of aircraft now, her A-10s, transport helicopters bringing in supplies, medevac birds pulling out wounded. It was controlled chaos, and she was at the center of it, directing traffic, making decisions, keeping people alive. Major Terk flew her wing perfectly, covering her turns, watching her six, calling out threats she couldn't see. Whatever his reservations about her command, he was professional enough to follow her lead, and she was grateful for it. The morning dissolved into a blur of radio calls and attack runs. She lost track of the number of targets she engaged, the number of decisions she made, the number of times she heard the phrase "good effects." That meant her weapons had found their mark. By noon, the Marines had secured 3 of the 6 ridgelines, and the enemy was falling back, disorganized and demoralized by the constant air attacks. It was working. The general's plan was actually working. Renee was returning to base for refuel and rearm, her 4th sortie of the day, when the call came that changed everything. Riot Control, Overwatch, we've got a situation. Demon 5-2 is pinned down in a valley, heavy contact. They're running low on ammunition and they've got wounded. We need immediate support, but the valley is under a cloud layer. Can you get in there? Renee checked the weather display. The clouds had moved in during the last hour, typical mountain weather, and they were sitting right at 3,000 feet. She'd have to fly underneath them, which meant low altitude, limited visibility, and maximum exposure to ground fire. It was dangerous as hell. Overwatch, Riot, I can get in there. Send me the grid. The coordinates appeared on her display, and her stomach sank. The valley was narrow, winding, surrounded by high terrain, the kind of place where one mistake would slam you into a mountainside. In clear weather it would be challenging. In low clouds it was borderline suicidal, but the Marines were dying. That was the only calculation that mattered. Overwatch, Riot is pushing. Hog 2-1, stay high and cover me in case I need to egress fast. Riot 2-1, are you sure about this? Terk's voice, carefully neutral. Negative 2-1, but I'm doing it anyway. She nosed over and descended into the clouds, the world turning gray and featureless, instruments becoming her only reference. Altitude, heading, airspeed, the numbers were her lifeline. At 2,000 feet she broke out underneath the cloud layer and found herself in a twilight world, the valley floor visible below, the mountains shrouded in mist. She followed the terrain, flying by visual reference and instinct, the Warthog responding to her inputs like an extension of her body. The valley twisted left, then right, and she followed it, searching for the Marines. 5-2, Riot Control, I'm in your area. Pop smoke. Riot 5-2 were popping red. Red smoke appeared ahead, marking the Marine position at the base of a cliff. Beyond it, Renee could see enemy fighters advancing through the rocks, dozens of them, using the terrain and weather to cover their approach. They were less than 100 meters from the Marine position and closing. She had one chance to stop them. One pass, maximum effect, and then she'd have to pull out before the valley walls trapped her. She armed the cannon, selected combat mix, and lined up her attack. The Pipper settled on the advancing enemy and she pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, 60 rounds per second tearing into the rocks, and she walked the fire across the enemy line like a scythe cutting wheat. Bodies fell, the advance stopped, and then she was pulling up hard, climbing back into the clouds, her altimeter spinning as she fought to gain altitude before the mountains killed her. She broke through the cloud layer at 4,000 feet, her heart hammering, her hands slick with sweat inside her gloves. That had been too close, way too close. 5-2, Riot, how copy? Riot 5-2, you just saved our lives. They were about to overrun our position. Renee allowed herself a shaky breath. 5-2, hold your position. I'm coming back around for another pass if you need it. Negative, Riot, negative, you've done enough. They're pulling back, we're going to consolidate and wait for extract. Thank you, thank you. She climbed to a safe altitude and checked her fuel. Low, too low for another pass anyway. Time to head home. Overwatch, Riot Control, I'm Winchester and Bingo Fuel returning to base. Copy, Riot. The ground commander says. Vargas paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, thick with emotion. He says you're the bravest pilot he's ever seen. I'm inclined to agree. Renee didn't trust herself to speak, so she just keyed the mic twice in acknowledgement and turned toward home. Below her, the valley was obscured by clouds, hiding the evidence of battle, the blood and the bodies, and the narrow margin between victory and disaster. She'd done her job. She'd kept people alive. And she'd survived. For today, that was enough. The landing was routine, the debrief longer. General Morrison wanted every detail, every decision, and she provided them mechanically, her mind still half in the cockpit, half in that clouded valley. When it was finally over, when she'd answered every question and filed every report, Renee walked out into the evening air and found herself shaking. The delayed stress response, the adrenaline crash, she'd experienced it before, but it never got easier. She sat down on the edge of the hardstand, her legs suddenly unreliable, and put her head in her hands. "You okay, Captain?" A voice, female, unfamiliar. Renee looked up and saw a young Marine corporal, her uniform dusty and stained, one arm in a sling. "I'm fine, just tired. I'm with Demon 5-2. I was in that valley today." The corporal sat down beside her, moving carefully because of the injured arm. "I wanted to thank you. I thought we were going to die down there, and then you came through the clouds like something out of a movie and just saved us, all of us." Renee didn't know what to say to that. "I was just doing my job." Maybe. But you were doing your job, and whether that grounded every other aircraft, flying through a valley that could have killed you to help people you didn't know. That's not just a job, ma'am, that's something else. The corporal stood, wincing slightly. "Anyway, I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted you to know that everyone in my unit is alive because of you. We won't forget that." She walked away, leaving Renee alone with her thoughts and the weight of what the young Marine had said. She'd saved them, all of them. Not just kept them alive, saved them from certain death. It should have felt triumphant, victorious, but instead it felt overwhelming. How many people were alive right now because of decisions she'd made today? How many families would see their loved ones again because she'd been willing to fly into clouds and valleys where other pilots wouldn't go? The responsibility was staggering, but so was the purpose. This was why she flew. This was why her father had flown. Not for the medals or the recognition or the call signs, but for moments like this, when training and courage and desperate necessity combine to pull people back from the edge. She stood, her legs steadier now, and looked up at the darkening sky. Tomorrow she'd fly again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until the mission was complete or she couldn't fly anymore. The operation in Kashgar Valley continued for another 48 hours, and Renee flew 11 more sorties, each one a carefully orchestrated dance of violence and precision. The Marines pushed forward, the enemy pulled back, and slowly, grid by grid, the valley came under American control. The cost was measured in ammunition expended, aircraft damaged, and lives lost, both friendly and enemy. But it was less than it could have been, would have been, without aggressive air support. On the third day, as the sun was setting over the mountains, Colonel Vargas called her into his office. He looked exhausted, gray-faced from 72 hours of combat operations, but there was satisfaction in his expression. "Captain Cahill, sit down." She sat, wondering what was coming. Promotion, reprimand. With the military, you never knew. Vargas pulled up a holographic display showing mission statistics. 15 combat sorties over 3 days. 243 enemy fighters confirmed killed, 12 vehicles destroyed, 4 command posts eliminated. 0 friendly fire incidents, 0 aircraft lost. "Captain, those are extraordinary numbers." "The other pilots did most of the work, sir. I was just coordinating." "Don't be modest, it doesn't suit you." Vargas closed the display and leaned back in his chair. "The Marines are putting you in for the Silver Star. General Morrison is supporting it. And the media relations people want to do a story about you, first female A-10 pilot to command a major combat operation, Angel of Kashgar, all that public affairs nonsense." Renee felt her jaw tight. "Sir, I'd prefer not to do any media." "I figured you'd say that. I told them no. Your job is flying, not being a poster girl for the Air Force." He paused. "But I need you to understand something, Captain. Whether you like it or not, you're becoming a symbol." There aren't many women flying attack aircraft, and the ones who do face constant scrutiny. What you did here, it matters. It proves something important. Sir, I don't want to prove anything, I just want to do my job. I know, but sometimes doing your job proves things anyway. Vargas stood and extended his hand. Outstanding work, Captain. Your father would be proud. The Silver Star ceremony took place 3 weeks later, a formal event with dress uniforms and flags, and all the military pageantry that Riene privately thought was ridiculous. She stood at attention, while a brigadier general she'd never met pinned the medal to her uniform and read the citation in a voice that carried across the parade ground. For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. She stopped listening. The words were just words, formal language for things that had been chaotic and terrifying and necessary. What mattered were the Marines who'd been there, the ones standing in formation, watching her receive a decoration for keeping them alive. That was real. The rest was theater. After the ceremony, she found herself surrounded by well-wishers, other pilots, officers she barely knew, all wanting to shake her hand and offer congratulations. She endured it with as much grace as she could muster, but inside she was counting the minutes until she could escape back to the squadron-ready room. Major Terk found her during the reception, a glass of champagne in his hand. Hell of a speech the general gave. Made it sound like you won the war single-handedly. I didn't win anything. I just kept people from losing. Same thing sometimes. He took a sip of champagne. Look, I owe you an apology. When the general put you in charge, I thought it was a mistake. Thought you were too junior, too. Well, you know, too female. Yeah, too female. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I was wrong. You flew circles around everyone, made the right calls, and brought everyone home. That's leadership. Gender doesn't enter into it. Riene accepted the apology with a nod. Thanks, Major. That means something coming from you. Don't let it go to your head, Captain. You're still a nugget in my book. But he was smiling when he said it, and she smiled back. Progress, she thought. Slow, grudging progress, but progress nonetheless. The war continued. It always did. Riene flew more missions, trained new pilots, and slowly built a reputation as someone you wanted overhead when things went wrong. The call sign Riot Control became known beyond her squadron, whispered in ready rooms and operations centers. 2 years after Kashgar Valley, Riene was promoted to major and given command of her own squadron. The 74th Fighter Squadron, the Flying Tigers, based out of Nellis Air Force Base. It was a prestigious assignment, and it came with a new level of scrutiny. Female squadron commanders were still rare enough to draw attention, and Riene found herself navigating not just the technical challenges of command, but the political ones as well. There were officers who resented her rapid promotion, who thought she'd been advanced because of her gender rather than her abilities. There were pilots who questioned every decision, looking for evidence that she didn't belong. And there were the inevitable comments, the casual sexism that still infected military culture despite decades of official equality. She dealt with it the only way she knew how, by being better than everyone else. She flew more hours, studied harder, made better decisions. She mentored the younger pilots, especially the women, and she maintained standards that were exacting but fair. Slowly, grudgingly, she won over most of the skeptics. Not all. There were always true believers who would never accept a woman in command, but most. The squadron flourished under her leadership. Their readiness rates climbed, their accident rates dropped, and when they deployed to combat zones, they performed flawlessly. The Flying Tigers became known as one of the best A-10 squadrons in the Air Force, and Riene's reputation grew accordingly. But success brought its own complications. She was asked to speak at conferences, to advise on integration policies, to be the face of women in military aviation. She hated it, preferred flying to politics, but she understood the necessity. If she didn't speak, others would speak for her, and the narrative would be shaped by people who'd never flown combat missions. So she spoke. She told the truth about combat aviation, that it was hard, dangerous, and indifferent to gender, that women could fly and fight as well as men if given the chance, that the military was stronger when it utilized all its talent, not just half. Some people listened, others didn't, but the conversation was happening, and that mattered. One evening, 5 years after Kashgar Valley, Renee was sitting in her office at Nellie's when her phone rang. Unknown number but military exchange. She answered, "Major Cahill." "Major, this is Colonel Chen from Air Combat Command Personnel. Do you have a few minutes?" The conversation that followed was brief and bewildering. The Air Force was establishing a new training program, an advanced course in close air support designed to teach the next generation of pilots the skills they'd need in complex combat environments. They wanted her to run it, not teach, run. Design the curriculum, select the instructors, build the program from the ground up. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not an academic. I'm a line pilot." "Which is exactly why we want you." "The academics can teach theory. We need someone who can teach reality." Colonel Chen paused. "Major, you've flown more danger-close missions than any pilot currently in the Air Force. You've commanded in combat, trained pilots, and built a squadron culture that produces exceptional aviators. This program needs that kind of experience. Frankly, it needs you." Renee thought about it. Thought about leaving the cockpit, giving up flying to become an instructor. It felt like surrender, like admitting she was too old or too tired to do the real work. But then she thought about all the young pilots she'd seen die because they didn't have the skills or the experience to survive combat. She thought about the mistakes she'd made, the lessons she'd learned the hard way, and how valuable that knowledge could be if passed on effectively. "When would you need me to start, sir?" "Yesterday, Major, but we'll settle for next month." 3 weeks later, she relinquished command of the Flying Tigers in a ceremony that was more emotional than she'd expected. The squadron presented her with a painted portrait of herself and her aircraft, a tradition for departing commanders, and the younger pilots, especially the women, lined up to shake her hand and thank her for showing them what was possible. "You proved we belong here, ma'am," one young lieutenant said, tears in her eyes. "Every time I climb into a cockpit, I think about what you did at Kashgar. It reminds me that we can do anything if we're good enough and brave enough." Renee hugged her, breaking protocol, not caring. "You belong here because you earned it, Lieutenant, not because of me. Never forget that." She moved to the training command facility at Nellie's, a cluster of buildings on the north end of the base where the Air Force's most advanced courses were taught. The program she built was called the Advanced Close Air Support Course, and it was brutal by design. 6 weeks of intensive training, combining classroom instruction with realistic simulations and live-fire exercises. The students learned tactics, weapons employment, communication protocols, and most importantly, how to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Renee taught some of the classes herself, but mostly she supervised, evaluated, and refined the curriculum based on what she saw. She brought in experienced pilots as instructors, many of them veterans of the same conflicts she'd fought in, and she created a culture that valued honesty over ego. If you made a mistake in her course, you admitted it, learned from it, and moved on. Denial was the only unforgivable sin. The course became famous, then legendary. Pilots who graduated from it were marked as elite, trusted with the most dangerous missions. Other countries sent their aviators to train there, hoping to absorb some of the expertise. And at the center of it all was Renee, the woman they still called Riot Control, teaching a new generation how to control the chaos of combat. She was 41 years old when a young captain approached her after class one day, his expression nervous. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Depends on the question, Captain." "They say you flew into Kashgar Valley in low clouds, that you saved a Marine unit when everyone thought they were dead. Is that true?" Renee studied him. He was young, maybe 25, with the eager intensity of someone who still thought war was glorious. She decided to tell him the truth. "Yes, it's true. It was also the most scared I've ever been in my life. I couldn't see the mountains through the clouds, and I was flying by instruments and instinct, and I honestly thought I was going to die. But the alternative was letting Marines die, and I couldn't accept that, so I went in anyway." "How did you have the courage?" "I didn't. I was terrified. But courage isn't the absence of fear, Captain. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Remember that, because someday you'll be scared too, and you'll have to choose whether to let the fear stop you or push through it." The captain nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson, and Renee could see the moment when he understood. Fear wasn't weakness. Fear was information. What you did with that fear determined who you were. The years passed. Renee was promoted to lieutenant colonel, then colonel. She ran the training program for 8 years, graduating over 1,000 pilots, many of whom went on to distinguished careers. She watched with quiet pride as some of her students became squadron commanders themselves, carrying forward the lessons she'd taught them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the culture began to change. Women in combat aviation became less unusual, less remarkable. There were still barriers, still prejudice, but the trajectory was clear. The next generation wouldn't have to fight as hard as she had to prove they belonged. That mattered more than any medal. When she was 50, the Air Force offered her a position as a brigadier general, the first step toward flag rank and the senior leadership that shaped policy. She turned it down. Why? The personnel officer asked, genuinely confused. You've earned it, Colonel. This is the natural progression of your career. I know, but I'm not interested in the Pentagon. I'm interested in flying. Ma'am, with respect, you're 50 years old. How much longer do you plan to fly? As long as they'll let me. She transferred back to a line squadron, taking a demotion in prestige to get back in the cockpit. Some people thought she was crazy. Others understood. She flew for 3 more years, accumulating hours, mentoring younger pilots and staying connected to the mission that had defined her life. Then, on a clear morning in the Nevada desert, during a routine training flight, her aircraft suffered a catastrophic engine failure. Not both engines. The A-10 could fly on one, but the single engine she had left firewalled and still couldn't maintain altitude. She was too low to eject safely, too far from base to make an emergency landing. In the 15 seconds she had to make a decision, Renee thought about her father, about Kashgar Valley, about all the pilots she'd taught and the Marines she'd saved. Then she aimed her dying aircraft at an empty stretch of desert, rode it down, and pulled the ejection handle at the last possible moment. The rocket motor fired, the seat flew clear, and she tumbled through the air before the parachute deployed. Renee hit the ground hard, felt something in her leg crack, and lay in the desert sand staring at the sky while sirens approached. The helicopter arrived within minutes, medics rushing to stabilize her, but she waved them off. I'm okay, check the aircraft. Ma'am, the aircraft is destroyed, you need medical attention. She laughed, which hurt, and realized she was crying, not from pain, though her leg was screaming. From relief, from joy, from the simple fact that she was alive. She'd survived, again. The injuries were serious: compound fracture of the left femur, 3 broken ribs, concussion. The recovery took 6 months, and the flight surgeon was unequivocal. She'd never fly fighters again. Too much damage, too much risk. She'd hit her physical limits. Renee accepted it with more grace than she'd expected. She was 53 years old, had flown over 4,000 hours in combat and training, and had survived more close calls than she could count. She'd had a good run. Maybe it was time to do something else. The Air Force offered her a teaching position, and she accepted. Not the advanced course this time, but basic flight training, teaching brand new pilots their first lessons in military aviation. It was humbling, full circle, and surprisingly satisfying. She taught them to pre-flight, to navigate, to think 3 steps ahead. She taught them respect for the aircraft, for the weather, for the terrible responsibility of flying machines that could kill them or others in an instant. And she taught them about purpose, about why they were doing this, about the ground troops who depended on air support and the consequences of failure. Some of them listened. Others didn't, not at first, but she was patient. She remembered being young and arrogant, convinced she knew everything. Time in combat had taught her humility. The students would learn too, or they wouldn't last. On her last day of teaching, 5 years later, the base held a retirement ceremony. Full honors, speeches, the presentation of a flag. The commander of Air Combat Command flew in personally to shake her hand and present her with a commendation citing her 35 years of service. Colonel Cahill, you are a legend in military aviation, a pioneer who proved women can fly and fight at the highest levels. Renee stood at the podium in her dress uniform, the silver star and distinguished flying cross visible on her chest along with a dozen other decorations, and looked out at the assembled crowd. Current students, former students, pilots she'd served with, ground troops whose lives she'd saved. The Marines from Demon 2-1 had sent a delegation, gray-haired men now but still recognizable. She saw Major Terk, now a colonel himself, and Colonel Vargas, retired but still sharp-eyed. And in the front row, carefully preserved in a glass case, was a photograph of her father in his flight suit, standing beside his Cobra. The sight of it nearly broke her composure. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "I'm not good at speeches, so I'll keep this brief. I've been flying for 35 years, and every day I've tried to live up to the legacy of the pilots who came before me. My father taught me that flying isn't about glory or recognition. It's about service. It's about showing up when people need you, doing the hard things, and making sure your people come home. Everything I've done, every mission I've flown, every student I've taught has been in service of that principle." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "People call me a pioneer, a trailblazer, but I've never thought of myself that way. I just wanted to fly. And when they told me women couldn't do this job, I proved them wrong, not with words but with actions. I showed them that skill and courage and dedication aren't gendered. They're human qualities, and any person who possesses them can excel in this profession. I'm proud of that. Proud that the young women coming up behind me won't face the same barriers I did. Proud that we've built a better Air Force, a stronger Air Force, by embracing everyone who wants to serve." The crowd applauded, but she raised a hand. "I'm not finished. I want to tell you something important. The greatest honor of my life wasn't the medals or the promotions or the recognition. It was the radio calls from ground troops saying, 'We need you.' It was knowing that when I showed up, when I brought the Warthog, people lived who otherwise would have died. That's what mattered. That's what will always matter. So to the young pilots here today, remember that." After the ceremony, there was a reception, and Renee found herself surrounded by well-wishers. She shook hands, accepted congratulations, and tried not to think about the fact that tomorrow she'd be a civilian for the first time since she was 18 years old. It felt strange, untethered, like stepping off a cliff. One of the Marines from Demon 2-1 approached her, a gray-haired man with a limp and a young woman beside him. "Colonel Cahill, I'm Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, retired. I was at Kashgar Valley. You saved my life." Renee shook his hand. "I'm glad you made it, Gunny. This is my daughter, Sarah. She's at the Air Force Academy, wants to be a pilot like you." The young woman stepped forward, nervous and starstruck. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. My dad told me about what you did, and it inspired me to apply to the academy. I want to fly A-10s. I want to help people like you did." Renee felt something catch in her throat. The cycle continued. The legacy passed on. "What year are you?" "Freshman, ma'am." "Then you've got a long road ahead of you. It won't be easy. There will be people who doubt you, situations that scare you, moments when you question whether you can do this. But if you want it badly enough, if you're willing to work harder than everyone else and never give up, you can do it. I promise you that." The young woman's eyes were bright with determination. "I won't give up, ma'am, I promise." Renee smiled. "Good. And when you get your wings, come find me. I want to hear about your first solo." After the reception ended, after everyone had left, Renee found herself alone on the flight line, watching the sun set over the mountains. The same mountains where she'd flown her first combat mission, where she'd learned what it meant to be a pilot, where she'd discovered who she was. An A-10 taxied past, returning from a training mission, its distinctive profile unmistakable even in the fading light. The pilot rocked the wings in salute as they passed, and Renee waved back. She'd missed this. Missed the flying, the mission, the sense of purpose that came from doing something that mattered. But as she stood there in the Nevada evening, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to purple, Renee realized she wasn't sad. She was grateful. Grateful for every mission, every student, every moment she'd been privileged to serve. Grateful for the pilots who'd mentored her, the ground troops who'd trusted her, the aircraft that had kept her alive through impossible situations. And grateful for her father, whose legacy had shaped her life and whose memory had sustained her through the hardest moments. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd carried for 35 years, her father standing beside his Cobra, smiling at the camera. "I hope I made you proud, Dad," she whispered. "I tried to honor what you taught me. I tried to be worthy of the wings. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of jet fuel and desert sage, and Renee felt a sense of peace settle over her. She'd done what she'd set out to do. She'd proven that women could fly combat aircraft as well as men. She'd saved lives, trained the next generation, and left the Air Force better than she'd found it. In the distance, another A-10 was taking off, afterburners glowing in the twilight, climbing toward the darkening sky. Renee watched it go, watched it disappear into the vastness above, and she smiled. The mission continued. It always would. And somewhere up there in the endless sky that had defined her life, she knew her father was watching, proud of the pilot his daughter had become. The Angel of Kashgar. Riot Control. Colonel Renee Cahill, United States Air Force, retired. She turned away from the flight line and walked toward the parking lot, toward whatever came next, carrying with her the knowledge that she'd lived a life of purpose and meaning. The Warthog screamed through the canyon one last time in her memory, and she carried that sound with her into the rest of her life. Some legacies were written in the sky. Some were written in the hearts of the people you saved. Hers was written in both, and it would endure long after the last A-10 was retired and the wars she'd fought became history. Because she'd proven something important, that courage, skill, and dedication knew no gender, and that anyone willing to serve could make a difference. That was the real victory. That was what would last.